Right, we've reached the appointed hour and we've have a quorum. The meeting is now called to order. Thank you for coming. Agenda item number 1, confirmation minutes on the 28th of the meeting on 28th of October. The minutes have been sent to members. We have not received any proposed amendment so far. So if there is no objection, shall we confirm the minutes? Thank you. Let us invite the officials into the room. May I welcome the government officials for attending today's meeting. The list of attendants has been put before members, and therefore I will not take the time to go over the list with members and introduce officials. Now, at the meeting on the 20th of October, members raised several questions, and the administration has replied in writing. Members may refer to paper CB 1236/1415/02. If I may now invite officials to take us through the paper. Thank you, Chairman. At the last meeting, members raise several questions on the effectiveness of enforcement, and we have provided the answer. We fully agree with members that strict enforcement is very important. As for unleased and unallocated government land, in terms of numbers and in terms of their distribution, it is really not practical to conduct comprehensive inspections. Therefore, the Lands Department will conduct inspection when there are complaints or referrals. This is the most cost-effective approach. Inspection is done on a risk-based arrangement, and we focus at black spots and also complaint spots and adjust the patrol routing accordingly. Frequency is also adjusted according to the risk assessment. We also make use of aerial photos to assist the inspection and see if there is any increase in unlawful occupation. We've also stepped up training of the staff members. Members have also asked about the overall workflow of enforcement action. And we have selected a recent case. We cannot say that this is a typical case. This is a relatively straightforward and recent actual case which we think can be put before members for reference. Upon receipt of a complaint or referral, the Lands Department will send the staff members of that district to conduct an inspection to ascertain if there is any unlawful occupation. And after confirming that there is, then under Cap 2861, a notice will be put up on site. The persons concerned are asked to cease occupying the land unlawfully before a specified date. Upon expiry of the notice, further action will be taken if occupation has not ceased. Action includes Section 6.2 and 6.3, i.e. the removal and demolition of the structure on site. Legal advice will be sought, and the administration will consider whether prosecution will be taken out against the offender. As for private land, we have put it in the annex, but that is outside Cap 28. As for publicity, we do have APIs on TV and on radio. We send the message that there are serious consequences of illegal or unlawful occupation of government land, and we will step up our efforts in this area of publicity. Thank you. The Deputy Secretary. Do members have any questions? With regard to the questions and answers? Chairman, 4 minutes each. Concerning the last question, now there is a transfer, and the government says there is no, it cannot control. Even if it has been transferred, it is still unlawful. After the transfer, the occupation is still unlawful, and you will go after the new buyer. How the new buyer goes after the seller is another matter. You really need to do more publicity, but I am afraid whether TV API is adequate. Many who bought such sites or such pieces of land may be new immigrants, and they suffer. You really need to find the various effective ways to publicize it. Yeah, thank you, Chairman. We'll go back to talk to the colleagues of the District Lands Office or the Lands Department to see if more channels can be used, say, by way of pamphlets or putting up posters at the offices or the like. Can you do it in the solicitor firms, with the solicitor firms in particular, transfers of private land, in particular farmland? Yes, we are printing posters and we'll distribute the posters to the villages. As for the Law Society, in fact, we did send letters to members of the Law Society asking them to pay attention to this type of transactions. Shouldn't the lawyers have the responsibility to inform the buyer? The buyer should have been reminded. I think it's about a difference between the actual site or actual piece of land and the document. The lawyers deal with the document, but on site, some part of the site may belong to government land. That's one of the problems we discussed at the last meeting. The professional has the liability to remind his or her client who is considering buying the piece of land or the superstructure on that piece of land. As said by Olga, in the past, we sent information via the Law Society. As for the information on site, or on the ground, rather, we put up posters. In fact, the potential buyer doesn't know the boundary. The professional has to provide the advice.
Actually, we talk about public education. There are still some areas that we need to strengthen, such as the Secretariat said we are going to talk to the Lawyers Association, and of course we would also bring forward it to companies on land transfer. And also on the level of the district councils, we would also send this message out through pamphlets, or maybe talk to the representatives of the suburban areas to try to strengthen public awareness and public education. Thank you. Any other questions from members? Mr. Chen has raised the same question. For some cases, people don't know that they're actually using government land. They thought that it's private land, and the lawyers just look at the papers or the documents. There are not any problems. But then they might have exceeded the boundaries of private land, because what we face right now is the land boundaries. For land, especially in the new territories, it's very hard for you to define the land boundaries unless it's an expert. The lawyers can follow up with the previous owners. Yes, they can do it on paper, but they don't know that they have already occupied government land. Well, this is not directly related to our bill right now, but you know, it's also linked. Does the administration have any way of measure to try to work on this? There's a classic case which took place from March to May, and ultimately the person was only fined $2,000. Can the Lansdy share with us your views or what you have been doing so far? Well, you know, it's a private sale. If there are any issues on the land boundaries, then you should find a surveyor to try to define the land boundary. But it is not mandatory right now. Well, for private sales, I think you should try to protect your own interest. Well, should you remind, the public, because most members of the public, they've lived there for 10 years. They don't know that they're actually living on government property. There's no way for them to know. I think the government needs to do a bit more to remind them. Well, of course, you can say that it's a private sale, but then you're talking about government land. You have the responsibility to manage the land. Well, although you say that you're in lack of manpower, this should not be an excuse, because we are talking about public funding here. Thank you, Chairman. Concerning your question, if we could try to strengthen the reminders when we meet with the Lawyers Association, or maybe try to seek a surveyor's point of view. Well, experts can identify, but can they participate in providing information to the potential buyer? The potential buyer needs to know the need to seek a surveyor's advice, because the buyer probably has no idea that this needs to be done. We would try to enhance the information given to the public. Thank you. Dr. Lo Wai Kwok. Thank you. In the last meeting, I requested the administration to provide us with figures on the overall situation of UUGL. I see on paper the numbers can reflect the seriousness of the situation. In 2011, the Landsd said through complaints or referrals in 2012, it's 10,592 cases, and in 2013, 11,016 cases. In 2012, 393 cases, and in 2013, 416 cases were identified through Landsd risk-based patrols. In other words, well, there are over 10,000 cases per year, and most of them are through complaints or referrals. That means it's unknown. If no complaints or referrals are received, then nobody would have any idea that the land occupied is unlawful. So this means that there are actually a lot of undetected cases. Well, the bills come here is to try to amend the bill and not to talk about issues on policies. But this reflects the seriousness of the situation. In principle, the amendment this time is just to raise the fine and the penalty. Or because if you're found out, then you're only fined a very small amount, and they would just think of paying rent. Thank you. Well, yes, we agree that it's been over a decade that the penalty and the fine have not been amended, and yes, we understand there is a need to amend that. And we're now asking members to help us amend the penalty. Concerning complaints and referrals, we try to focus on each and every complaint referral and to follow up with that area. We would adjust our risk-based patrols, especially targeting black spots based on the cases. Thank you. Dr. Low, I'd like to follow up on a question. We're not just talking about policy here or to look into your execution measures. I think that aerial photos should be able to help, because now you can find it on Google Map and you'll be able to enlarge it as big as possible. Maybe your colleagues don't need to just conduct patrols. They can maybe try to monitor through aerial photos. If they see that after a certain period of time there has been a change, maybe in the past it's green, but now no green exists, and you would know that there is some kind of problem. Would you make use of modern technology to conduct more patrol? Yes, we do make use of aerial photos, but we think that on-site inspection is also very important. For complaints and referrals, we would follow up. But from aerial photos, we just use as an additional supplement right now. Chairman. Yes, we are going to make use of modern technology to execute orders. But we also need to look into the area to see whether we could collect data and try to prosecute the offenders. And we would make use of modern technology to help us with the investigation. Thank you. well, you cannot only rely on desk work, but with modern technology, you'll be able to very quickly understand the changes happening on a certain piece of land, and together with patrols, you'll be able to identify problems. Well, I know that it is difficult, but technology should really be able to help, especially in the initial stage of collecting data. You'll be able to do a lot of work at your desk. Yes, I'd like to say that at the last meeting on the 28th and at today's meeting, members are concerned with the frequency of patrol, although we are talking only about amendment on penalty here. We understand, there is an issue with lack of manpower. However, unlawful use of land affects government resources and actually is not conducive to the surrounding areas. And unlawful use might give rise to corruption issues as well. So I really hope the government would strengthen up with more measures. As members said, there is a lot of technology that could assist us. Ms. Lam of Landsd also has told us last time that the frequency has now been increased of patrols. Well, although it's been 4 decades since the fine has been amended, I'm sure many of our members are in support of the amendment this time. I hope the related departments and bureaus would put more effort in this line of work. Thank you. Ms. Sit Ho. The Director of Audit has also talked about unlawful occupation of government land before, and that we could make use of Google Map to patrol. Well, ever since the last follow-up meeting of the government and with the Audit Commission, do you have any numbers of the prosecuted cases? Well, of course, I know that you don't have enough manpower because no matter how many people you have, you can patrol the entire new territories. But are there any numbers that you could give us to use as reference? Well, administration said, well, yes, you need to secure the services of a surveyor. Let's say the buyer does not know how to protect himself and he spent a lot of money in buying government land. And if that piece of land, if that land really is government land, then the victim, that is the buyer, how could the buyer try to seek compensation from the lawyer in charge or from the seller? Or who will be giving the compensation? Thank you.
Yes, the DS. Now, this is, after all, a civil case. If loss has to be recovered from the seller, or to recover loss from the lawyer or from the any other professional. Now, there will be publicity, and we will include certain advice. Say, if one has encountered such a situation, one is to take the matter up through the civil channel, or one has to hold somebody responsible. And if we have received such inquiries, our colleagues will respond accordingly. Now the case cannot be followed under Cap 28. And we can have FAQs and remind the victim to follow the matter through the professionals involved. Now there was an issue on reverse possession. Somebody bought government land, a piece of government land unknowingly, and you also charge rates. Now when you charge rates on the owner or on the tenants, you said they thought that the government had confirmed that they were the owner, but actually that was not the case. Now if people have already bought a piece of land and you charge them rates, and over a certain years the owner claims possession, what is your attitude towards this LRC report? Concerning reverse possession, we are still studying the LRC report, and we have yet to form a view on that. Well, as for an individual case, it really depends on the circumstances of the case. The LRC report, in respect of government land, there is no change in the length of occupation. It is still 60 years. That is the position of the LRC. And we do not see any possibility of changing that. Now, since government land is 60 years, so you don't need to be very concerned. That will be beyond 2047. In the new territories, the land boundaries may not be very clear. In particular, the old lots. Probably because of the precision of equipment and other constraints. That is a very serious, that is a very important issue. And if you are going to do the survey all over again, that will cost a lot of money. I think there's a need to remind citizens when they conduct land transactions, they should pay special attention to that. I don't know whether members have further questions. If not, then we can move on to studying the bill clause by clause. Shall we adhere to the Chinese version or the English version? If there is no specific suggestion, shall we start with the Chinese version? You can look at the bill CB 378-798-1314 or the markup copy, which is CB1 102-1415-01. I ask the administration to go over the bill clause by clause. Chairman, with your approval, I suggest we start with the markup copy, and there you can see the changes. Okay, there is no objection. Please go ahead. I'll ask my colleague to take you through the paper. Chairman and members, let us refer to the markup copy. And we start with Section 6.4. There is an amendment. Section 6 is about unlawful occupation of unleased land, is in relation to penalty and related matters. We propose to introduce a penalty system from $10,000 to $50,000 on first offense, and then a maximum fine of $1 million on each subsequent occasion. That is an imprisonment, and we propose remain unchanged. Another 6.4, we want to introduce an additional daily fine, a further fine of $50,000 for each day during which the offense continues. So and if it is on a subsequent occasion, then a further fine of $100,000. Now concerning 6.4 and subsequent sections, we have made reference to similar offenses under similar ordinances such as Cap 123, Cap 131, and Cap 354. With regard to unlawful occupation of unleased land and breaching planning laws, the offenses are similar. Therefore, 6.4, the proposed amendments to 6.4 is based on Cap 131, which is Town Planning Ordinance. Do members have any questions? Well, let me ask this. 6.4a. It is about the construction of a structure on unleased land. Now concerning this, now they put up structures. Sometimes they don't just put up a structure, or they don't put up a structure. Say this is government land, and there is a stream. They just put some debris or something into the stream and change the direction of the stream. Can this provision be invoked to impose a penalty on the offender? Say, Mr. Chairman, the Lands Department has received a complaint that there is a suspicion that government land is occupied. A site inspection will be conducted. The situation after upon inspection, the situation will be recorded, and if it touches on other ordinances, the case will be referred to other relevant departments. Ms. Lam can supplement. With regard to Cap 28 per se, 6.4 deals with unlawful occupation of government land. It doesn't pertain to structure. 6.4a deals with the erection of structure. So we are dealing with two different situations. It is hard for me to comment on a specific case. The principle is simple. When we look at a case, we look at all relevant matters and then refer the case to the relevant authority. The Lands Department, do you have anything to add? I remembered that did happen in the past. It can be regarded as occupying government land is dumping on government land, depending on actual circumstances. That's possible. Now 7.4 also refers to that. A removal of earth, turf, or stone from unleased land. That is the reverse. It depends on the nature of the case. We may be able to invoke this provision. As said by Mr. Law, one may not just rely on Cap 28 only. There may be other pieces of ordinances that are applicable. Of course, we cannot rule out the possibility of using Cap 28. The Lands Department has already confirmed that that also falls within the ambit of this ordinance, which is unlawful occupation of government land. Yes, indeed. Ms. Ip Kok Him, 4 minutes. Now, how can you define whether it is a structure or not? Now, in the previous discussion, there was quite a lengthy discussion on how one can define a structure. Now, the piece of government land is surrounded by private land, and you have no access. And if you just, by visual inspection, you see a structure, then it is a structure. Or you go inside it, and then you touch it, and then you can call it or confirm it a structure. Last time when we discussed this issue, there was quite a lengthy discussion. So how do we define there is a structure on government land? Ms. Lam.
Well, two questions. Well, how do we define a structure? Well, maybe when there are some gates outside surrounding, you might not see it. Ever since last time, we have already looked into it. If there is if there are gates surrounding government land, then we would take some sort of action. And if the gates are taken down and we can go in, we would then take action, because any kind of execution, then of course, or implementation, then of course we would see whether this is really a structure. If there are structures erected, it might not exactly be near the ground, but it looks quite permanent, then we can say or call it a structure. Well, you haven't responded to my question. Well, if someone complains that there's a structure, but it's on private land and it's totally surrounded, you can't even go into it, but in the plan it's actually government land, how do you define that there is a structure existing on that piece of government land? Well, of course, if you see it, then you know it. But then what if there's something you cannot see it? Well, someone complained it. They said there's a structure inside, but you can't see it, and you can't go in illegally. So how can you take action? Well, this is my question. Mr. Ip's question is, how do you confirm that there are illegal structures on government land? Well, how do you detect structures that are not easily seen? Or if you have to go inside to be able to see the structure, then well, we have tried using a helicopter. It really depends on the case. My colleague said there's been a case in which a helicopter has been employed to take photos. Then you don't need to go through the piece of private land, because if it is totally surrounded and you can't go in legally, you are not permitted entrance, then we'll have to use other methods to collect data. Or does it mean that as long as you'll be able to take a photo, then you have completed your investigation and you don't need to, put a notice, because you said last time you need to put up a notice on the structure. So do you need to do that? So specifically, how do you put up the notice? Because if the owner or the occupant is not willing to cooperate, then how can you really see that they're using government land? And if yes, what is the procedure that you will take? Mr. Lam, please. Oh, yes. Well, if, according to our experience, if you need to walk through private land to be able to see the structure on government land, then what we do is to first try to contact the occupant to see whether it is convenient for us to go inside to detect the piece of government land, because the private land is surrounding the government land. If yes, then of course there is no problem. But if the occupant does not allow us entry, then we'll have to think of ways. And we might have to use a helicopter or to use some sort of flying device that we could use remote control to monitor the device to take pictures of the structure. And then we would seek the advice of surveyor to identify that that piece of land belongs to the government and there is a structure erected on it. Then we would ask the surveyor to be a witness for us. So you don't have to put up a notice on the structure saying that you are taking up government land. Let's say we are allowed entry, of course we will put up a notice. But if we are not allowed entry, then according to the law, we could put up a notice on a place closest to the piece of government land. Oh yes, so this is the procedure, but you would have to try to think of ways to put up the notice if the occupant is not cooperative. Well, I guess you could also climb down from the helicopter, right? Well, I want to see if members have any other questions on the provisions. Well, Mr. Ip only asked about the enforcement issues. Or let's say you use a flying device. We see that there are many of such devices flying above Harcourt Road. So if you are putting up notice, how did you do it last time in your previous case? If they really refuse you entry, can you send them a subpoena? I mean, in the past, it's only a one-time fine, but now there's a continuous fine per day. Now, if the person does not demolish the structure, then they'll need to pay a fine every day. So how do you ensure that the person will pay the fine? Well, although the enforcement measures differ, as Mr. Ip said, we are going to put up a notice nearby, and the notice would state clearly that the occupant needs to pull down the structure within a certain date, a certain period of time. And starting from the first day after the deadline, the fine would be imposed and it would accumulate by day. Let's say the deadline is November 24th and we would define it at 12 o'clock midnight. Once past 12:01, that would be counted as the beginning of the first day. Even though the notice cannot be put up on the structure, the notice would still be put nearby with the related information. Well, Chairman, well, let's say if it is a large piece of news, and the media would of course interview it, everyone would know about it, even interview the occupant, the unlawful occupant. But let's say it's a smaller case. I mean, it's a small piece of land. What if you really cannot see it? I hope that you would go back and take a look at the situation. Any other supplements? I would like to ask a question. Let's say you've identified a structure on unlawful land, and then when you go back again, you see a new structure. So would you repeat again the procedure? Is that how you do it? Because the fine is accumulated per day. Yes. Because the notice is for the current structure and a deadline has already been stipulated. For a new structure, then we would put up another notice with a new deadline. Any other questions? If not, let us continue. Thank you. Well, you've mentioned 6.4a on structure. Well, the amendment would be like this. Currently, we have 6.4 bracket A and bracket B. According to the 6.4 maximum penalty, we're going to raise it 50 times and to introduce accumulation of fines. So under 6.4a, if a person is convicted of the offense, then from 5,000 it will be raised to 2.5 million, and then imprisonment for 1 year. And we suggest that the imprisonment period remains the same. And under 6.4a, it is also mentioned that if the contravening act is done for any other purpose than gainful purpose, then the fine will be increased also 50 times to a fine of 500,000, and on each subsequent occasion it would be 1 million, and the imprisonment would remain the same. Three, also relates to 6.5, and that mainly is related to the authority may recover in accordance with 6a or 6 bracket 4a to recover from any person any cost incurred. When we feel that there might be some sort of it might be some quite unclear right now, so we say that according to 6.4a or 6.4a, for any offense under these two subsections, the court may, on application by the authority on the court's own initiative, order the person convicted of the offense to pay the cost mentioned in subsection 5. And the cost mentioned is actually in addition to what I've previously mentioned on 4AA and 4B. Thank you. Any follow-up from members? If not, then we can continue. Thank you. We move to the current Section 7 on prohibition of removal of earth, turf, or stone from unleased land. Our suggested amendment is to also to raise the fine 50 times from 5,000 currently to a maximum of 250,000. The imprisonment period would also remain the same. Any questions from members? Well, yes, we are raising the fine in the whole ordinance. Is there anything like the town planning ordinance where they would need to you try to reinstate the structure, or do you need to reinstate it? Well, yes. Well, putting up the notice is to ask the occupant or the owner to demolish the structure within the deadline to try to reinstate it. But if he does not do it within the timeline, then the authority will need to demolish the structure, and we will recover the cost from the occupant. And yes, as you said, it needs to be reinstated. But it's not part of the fine. The fine is really a fine. The reinstatement cost would also be recovered from the owner or from the occupant. Yes, I understand. You talked about the turf or earth being removed. So what are you going to do with that?
As a Section 7, well, that may not be done. There can only be a fine. According to existing provision, there is no specific provision for reinstatement. With regard to law enforcement, the most important thing is they should stop the occupation. They should stop the unlawful occupation. And then such offenses should be penalized accordingly. What about the responsibility for reinstatement? There is no such provision. But what about in the past, say for example, the streams and rivers, the river courses have been changed. Is there any follow-up action? Would the Lands Department follow the matter up? Or you just leave it as it is after a fine has been imposed? Other ordinances may have such requirements. Cap 28 doesn't. So if earth is removed, then they are not required to reinstate their place. The government will have to pay for that then. Now, it may cover many aspects. According to Cap 28, we don't have such power. Chairman, you mentioned a case that may come under the town planning ordinance. And according to the power vested, we may ask for reinstatement of the land. In terms of law enforcement, different government departments will exercise their powers according to their relevant ordinances. And if it is appropriate, the government department may require the offender to stop or to stop the offense, reinstate the original conditions, or recover cost. Now we are discussing penalty under sections 6 and 7, but they are different. Section 6 requires the removal of the structure, and you also recover costs from the removal of the structure if you do it for the offender. But if he takes away something, then there is no requirement of reinstatement. Now you don't accept the structure, so you need to remove the structure, but you don't need to reinstate the conditions, the original conditions. That may be costly, but you still don't want such powers, or you don't want the court to impose the requirement of reinstatement. Is it the intention of the administration? As for Section 7, the situation there is different from the situation under Section 6. Section 6 is about a structure, and reinstatement means the removal of the structure. But if earth or turf or stone is removed, and if the person is asked to reinstate the condition, reinstate the same stone, well, the intention is just to stop the unlawful activity.
Now,
the purpose of the provision is to stop the offense rather than reinstating the condition. The intention is not to ask the offender to get back the stones and put the stones back. Cap 28 only wants the offender to stop the offense, and therefore it cannot achieve the purpose set by the chairman, and which is reinstatement. Cap 28 doesn't deal with that, and no power has been authorized in that regard. But what about taking the responsibility? Now, if a fine has been, if you pay a fine, you still have to pay for the cost of removal of the structure. But under Section 8, there is no such requirement. The damage on government land is not compensated. I just want to make clear whether this is the intention of the administration. I understand that under other ordinances, if the person is required to reinstate the previous conditions, you will not let them off the hook, I believe. Yes, indeed. Do members have other comments or questions concerning this amendment? I just want to highlight this point. Okay, please go on. Chairman, the last one. We propose to amend the schedule under Section 5. We add reference to Section 6. This is just a technical amendment. That's all. We have already finished studying the bill. Whether it's the Chinese version or the English version, do you have any comments? If not, then we have finished the study of the bill. I don't know what is the timetable of the administration for resumption of second reading. If you have a timetable, I will have to give notice. And if members want to make any amendments, we do need to follow the timetable. And we have to go back. You need to go back to the electrical meeting for resumption of second reading. Maybe the administration can liaise with the Secretariat, and then I'll inform members of the timetable. Okay? AOB. If not, then thank you very much. Meeting is adjourned. This is the end of the meeting.